discuss some possible suggestions for possibly amending ordinance number 1042, which talks about our city's code of ordinances, extending the scope of the corridor overlay standards. And Ms. Richard has some comments that I believe that she's going to make to introduce this workshop and to sort of kick it off. And then I believe our city manager, Ms. Vicki Gaynor, has some comments that she would like to make. And then that will sort of lead to a discussion by the commission. And then also toward the end of the workshop, if there's some discussion from the public, we'll certainly entertain that as well. So should we start with Ms. Gaynor or Ms. Richard? What is the preference? Okay, with that, I'll turn the floor over to our new city manager, Ms. Vicki Gaynor.
Thank you, Mayor. For the past couple of months, we have been discussing, as so many businesses are in the rebuild process, do we want some uniformity and actually look at the code? I think it's ordinance 1042 that we take a look at and see if we need to update any of the pieces of this code to make sure that when these businesses are rebuilding, remodeling, that we can do something to enhance Highway 77 in the commercial corridor. I know that right now we have a couple, even the city has a couple of things in the works. We have the beautification grant that's going to really make Highway 77 beautiful, and that is actually from FDOT, and that's the landscaping side of it with new trees and all kinds of new plants. And we're doing that just a little bit different, working with Panhandle and Commissioner Aldrich and putting that together. But as we discuss some other things, we also noticed that there probably does need to be some updating, and Commissioner Aldrich brought that to our attention, that before people start to rebuild, that we give them some direction. So Amanda and I did meet and decided we wanted to bring a couple of things to your attention. We do have a design book. We also went and found some other designs that are in other cities, and so I'm going to ask Amanda if she'll come and she'll talk about the things we discussed. I want you to have as much information as possible when we move forward in trying to make sure that we have a good look, a certain look in the near future. So Amanda, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Hello. So I just put a few things together, and then I have some questions for you to think about, and some additional information, if you would like it. So I think you received the packets, which had a few things in there. The first of two current categories. So currently the city has two different categories where we require certain design specifications. The first one is the CRA storefront guidelines for the storefront assistance program. This has within it 3 architectural styles. These 3 styles were found to be, I'm assuming when the CRA was put together, to be the main styles that were existing within the historic Lynn Haven. And so these 3 styles are frame vernacular, classic revival, Spanish Mediterranean revival. This storefront program, which is this one here, addresses new development within the city. Whenever someone wants to construct a new building in the CRA, this is just for the CRA though, within the CRA, Ben will be the one who will look at the building to make sure that it conforms with the standards here. I think the majority of the people that have used this, though, have been people that are trying to get assistance with the storefront program, where they can get monetary assistance to redo the facades of their buildings. And currently, every project proposed for the storefront improvement assistance program must have one of those 3 architectural styles that I just told you about. The same checklist and requirements are for new commercial in the CRA. And the ULDC section 4.02.03 says that new development shall comply with the storefront design guidelines. However, it does not specifically address what happens when a building changes hands, where a building has been damaged and is being renovated. It might slip through. It might not necessarily come to Ben, where they're repainting, that kind of thing. So I don't know whether you wanted to look at that and see whether when we toughen things up, you know, some of those need to be toughened up also. So one of the questions is, do you want to give the ordinance more teeth to require that buildings that are modified have to comply with whatever, with this or whatever you decide to have? If you've got questions specifically about the CRA, then I recommend that you ask Ben about them, because he's the expert with the CRA. And also, if you do decide to make changes, can the changes go straight to the commission, or do they have to go through the CRA board if they're going to affect the CRA requirements? So that's something to think about. The second piece of paperwork I gave you was ordinance number 1042. Ordinance 1042 is the corridor overlay, which goes, it applies to commercial properties with frontage on Highway 77, south of 17th Street. That's where the CRA ends. So it does not apply to the CRA because the CRA has its own. So this is Highway 77, south of 17th Street, and Highway 390, south of West 17th Street and east of Illinois. Again, new properties or properties requiring a development order will be looked at to make sure that they comply with this. But when a building changes hands, when it's repainting, when they're doing minor stuff that they usually just apply for a building permit for, we might not see that in the planning department. So I guess one of the things that we need to think about is if you do decide to put different design guidelines in place, do you want to instigate a design review board for proposed new development? Once a pattern book or design requirements have been decided upon, do you want staff to review and make the decision? Are we going to put something in place whereby anything that comes for a building permit has to go through that review if it's within, and what area? The whole of the city, just the historic part of the city, the corridor overlay? So there's all those different things to think about, where you want it to apply, how you want it to be reviewed, and that's after you've decided upon what kind of style you want. As I mentioned, with the CRA, there were 3 main architectural styles. However, there are many, many more, and I'm going to hand you some handouts out in a minute so you can see some of the others. So one of the other things that I think perhaps you could discuss is, do you want to focus on one style for a cohesive look? So a strong community image, such as somebody mentioned, you know, some of the developments that were going on along 30A and that kind of thing. You can see the whole of those developments have a very definite look. In Lynnhaven, we have 3 main ones in the historic area, and then outside the historic area, we have all sorts. So do you want to allow a mix of styles? Or do you want to focus on trying to get one particular look, one image for Lynnhaven? So that's something I think perhaps you could think about also. The third handout that I gave you, I was doing some research locally to see if I could find ordinances and, you know, different materials that might help you. When I looked locally, it seemed like most of these things were downtown improvement boards or CRAs, not something kind of generic to the city. I did find, and a lot of them do also have these design review committees also, you know, places like Rosemary Beach and those kind of places. If someone wants to build something, they have to go to take their plans or whatever to the design review committee to get them approved. The third one that I gave you was the design guidebook for Orange County. Orange County have an ordinance in place, and these are the guidelines that basically support that ordinance. So this is what they call a user-friendly interpretation of the ordinance. And I do have copies of the ordinance for you, so I can give you copies of those ordinance, because this is probably something, I don't know, that you're not going to be able to make decisions on today, that you might have to think about. And so I'm going to give you a copy of the ordinance as well so that you can, look through that. But I'll identify some main points in just a moment. And they have said that the intent and purpose of these design standards is to create and maintain a strong community image. So they wanted a strong community image, and identify by providing for architectural and landscaping treatments that enhance the visual impact and contribution of commercial, office, and industrial development. Colors. You can select certain types of architectural features that you would like to see. You can also prohibit certain things, like for instance in Orange County, they don't allow metal buildings. They don't want that look. And you can also go as far as deciding upon color palettes. So that's something else to think about to get a coordinated look. Or you can, and then they can select from that color palette. So these are all just things for you to think about. And then I wanted to point out on, I don't know if you looked at page 17 of the Orange County Design Guidebook, on page 17, but they have display windows, and that's something that we don't really see. I don't even think downtown Panama City has those, but I can see that kind of thing on Florida Avenue or in the, historic part of Lynn Haven. So I'm almost finished. In the ordinance that I'm going to give you a bit later, they basically go through the same kinds of things as we do in our corridor overlay. And our corridor overlay deals with the facades that are viewable from the road, the roof treatments, making sure that, so you're not allowed any flat roofs. You've got, well, you can have flats so long as there's different heights, so you've got to have, like, in at least 3 places, you've got to have 3-foot rises. No bland flat frontages. You've got to have recesses or projections, that kind of thing. And when I looked at the Orange County ordinance, I noticed that they also have split their ordinance up into sections that deal with primary and secondary facades, roof treatments, and other building design. So there is some building design there, and as I said, they don't allow metal buildings. Roof treatments. They have customer convenience treatments as well for buildings where you're going to have a lot of flow. Facade treatments. They've basically got the same kinds of things as we've already got. So we have some of this. So maybe you just want to tweak it and give it more teeth, or maybe you just want to rework it totally. I'm now going to hand you out some different architectural styles, and this can be a bit overwhelming. What I recommend you do is I'm going to hand them out, and I recommend that thinking about Lynn Haven, and not particularly what you like preference wise, but what you think would work and you would like in Lynn Haven is maybe set the ones you like in one pile and the ones that you don't like in another pile. And then maybe you can kind of discuss the things that you like and the things that you don't like. So I'm just going to hand these out to you and then I'm done.
Okay, once Miss Richards has passed out the packet, if you want to take maybe a moment to look at those, and then at this point, I would just entertain comments, discussion from different members of the commission as we try to get a good discussion going, and then towards the end, we'll also ask for some public input as well.
And at the top, you'll see what kind of style it is.
Okay, do we have more than one?
I say we just paint everything white. Done with it.
Yeah, Alice. Yeah, we do have, if we have extra copies of these, I would maybe perhaps say that maybe we place those over on the desk for maybe the public to have copies of their extras. Yet another stack. Okay.
Any more comments?
Yeah, so just to be clear, any new development in the city, if it's in the CRA or if it's in the corridor overlay, we do look at the design. If it's outside of the corridor overlay or outside of the CRA, we don't.
Miss Amanda, I had some questions pertaining to, I guess, your research. So if we decided as a board or as a city to say, okay, 1,000 feet off of Highway 77 all the way down the corridor, these standards are going to apply. With Orange County, when they went and did this, the buildings that are existing currently, are they grandfathered in, and it only applies once they have to, update or remodel?
Generally, and you can confirm with Adam, but generally when an ordinance is brought in, then anything that's already in existence is grandfathered in. But then if something is damaged by 50% or more,
Bring it up to current code.
yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. I don't know whether we could put, they're grandfathered in, but if it changes hands or if they're going to remodel, perhaps that's something we could put in, Adam, that if somebody's going to remodel, if they come to pull permits for something like remodeling or something, then we could make them, obviously they can't rebuild it to a different style, but if there's a color palette or something, we could require that they paint to that color palette.
So I'm
Potentially you
looking,
could.
I'm sorry, go ahead. Mr. Albrecht, go ahead.
You can put some restrictions in place, but certainly those that have a constructed building now, you cannot apply ex post facto after the fact.
As I'm looking at the different packets, I see something that has the Italianate architecture, which is a little Mediterranean flair, but I don't see anything that reflects the old Florida with the Spanish influence that really, some of Lynn Haven's we've already in the CRA, especially with the old City Hall, with our bus stops, some of our other areas. So am I missing a package? I don't see the old Florida with the Spanish, which is different. So I was just curious, maybe it's just missing or.
No,
Okay.
I didn't see that. I didn't find that because in our code it says Spanish/Mediterranean.
Mhm.
But when I put Mediterranean and it kept coming up as Italian.
Okay, well, and
So
I'll.
maybe Ben has some.
Yeah, I would just suggest that maybe we add to the packet because especially all through not just Lynn Haven but through Central Florida with all of the influence from the Spanish into our state. That's if you look at the history of Lynn Haven with our city hall and also I would hope that would be somewhere in our consideration. Yeah.
Already in there. Yeah. Okay. There's examples in there. Okay.
But not in these is what I was saying.
Right. Yeah.
Sure.
Mhm. Mhm. Sure. Absolutely.
Sure. And I meant that in no way to be critical. I was just asking a question. That's all. So as we're looking, the floor is open with the commission, with your comments. I've certainly just made mine, so anyone else feel free to jump in.
Also had a question, I guess, if we adopt an ordinance that does say all of 77, will it have to be separate for the CRA, or will the CRA just fall in line with the new ordinance along the entirety of 77?
It's really an attorney
question.
if how the CRA plan should be changed.
There needs to be uniformity. So if there's any changes the commission wishes to see which conflict with the current rules and regulations inside the CRA, there'll have to be a modification for both.
Okay, so there'd be a modification then to our CRA board standards. It wouldn't just be trumped, quote unquote, by the new ordinance. kind of like federal versus state?
You would have to, you're going to revoke any conflicting ordinances, but you would want to update that so there's no conflict between an ordinance that's general versus an ordinance for the CRA.
Okay.
But it wouldn't, you're going to create too many conflicts. You got one rule for the CRA and one that are
That's what I'm
different.
thinking. Right. Okay, thank you.
If I may.
Oh, yes,
Can I?
I'm
Oh,
sorry. Go ahead.
okay.
I was-
That's okay. I'd just like to say how I feel about it. A new look is great. I have no problem with that. I don't even have a problem with picking out color palettes, as long as current owners and current businesses do not have to go to the expense to make their business look totally different. That would be like the attorney said, they would be grandfathered in. I'm not so sure how I feel about the fact that if somebody buys an existing business, if they would be forced to change the outside of it, it certainly add to the expense and all of that. And would we only be talking about the very front of the building? Or if they're freestanding, then we have to look at, the wraparound. I just think it could be very expensive. But if somebody's building a new building, I like these examples in the big book that you handed us, because I saw Simply Seafood and all those fancy schmancies and Adam's Pharmacy, and they look totally different, like they're in a different area completely. But I think as long as the old ones are get grandfathered in and we keep it, I'm only thinking about the money. I have to say, I'm thinking about the money and how expensive it would be for a new business owner to put in extra money. Then they would have to also have an engineer come out and design it all, and they give them a cost and yada, yada, yada.
Yeah, I agree, Commissioner. I mean, I don't think we're trying to create an undue burden on anyone.
Okay.
It's more about future development, more
Right.
so than
Because I think
development now.
even grocery outlet will be done soon.
Right.
So, and I like the drawing comparing those in that one book too. That was interesting how you showed I don't know who did that book, who put it together. Because yes.
This one's okay.
So I think we had we contacted with a firm to do that for us in 2003. So this is what we have already
oh,
in the CRA.
Mhm.
We could apply this to the whole of the city if you like this.
I thought they were very interesting. How they look totally different with just putting a lot of glass in the front and things like that.
But the trouble is, we still have situations.
Yes.
The trouble is, we still have sometimes have situations where we have buildings that are just not very nice looking, and someone will move in and they may paint it a different shade of bright yellow or something, but it's still that building. And I think maybe they're the kind of buildings that you were thinking about. So it's like, I don't know what we can do about those buildings, but this is what we have with the CRA. So we have this for the CRA, and then we have the overlay layer, which is it doesn't have as much detail in it as the CRA. So we could just apply the CRA to all of the commercial development, but maybe put a bit more detail in if you want, or a few more styles or some color palettes or something like that.
For example, Sam's Seafood, that one. Now I remember back when that was a gas station, and I think he's taken it, so much further than it ever was before. But on this example of where it would go in the future, it's like a 2-story with windows up top and everything like that. I mean, he would, if we could never require somebody to put on a second floor of something they didn't need. So it would still look like that. Anyway, I'm just worried about the expense. That's all I care about.
Mayor, if I may,
Sure, go ahead.
since it's a workshop, I guess we're talking opinions and
Absolutely.
while I'm not against requiring architectural accents or controls as far as depth changes, roof changes, I have a hard time telling somebody they have to do a craftsman style building or they have to do a Mediterranean style building. And if you own the property and you can meet our design guidelines, my opinion is you should be able to design that building the way you want it. If you want an Italian flair, you should be able to put an Italian flair in it, as long as you meet our design criteria. Again, that's my opinion. I mean, I look at our new garden center, and it is beautiful, but I would class it as a craftsman style building, you know, with the you know the stone bottom. City Hall, you know, is a Florida Spanish style, which I think is beautiful, and I think we need to maintain the style of the Florida, you know, that building. But I have an issue with dictating how somebody has to design their own home, as long as they meet, you know, criteria. I know you don't want a flat faced metal building, I get that, but if they want Corinthian columns in front of it, they ought to be able to put Corinthian columns in front of it. Or if they want a watchtower, they ought to be able to put a watchtower, as long as it meets the design criteria. But again, you know, that's one person's opinion. So
Thank you, Commissioner Russell. Is anyone else on the board? Any other comments?
Well, yeah, I mean, I understand what Commissioner Russell's saying. I do, but on the flip side, I also think there's always, I forgot what that Murphy's Law or whatever, if it can happen, it will, right? And it's like no one would ever put a, you know, New England style 4-story home with a spiral going up at downtown. And then as soon as I say that, somebody's going to move from up there and they're going to build one. And it's going to just look crazy in the middle of downtown. So I agree. I don't, like I told Commissioner Tenner, I don't necessarily envision any undue burdens on people or making someone do something they don't want to do. But I think keeping some lines in, you know, with the lanes visible of where we don't want people to go out of bounds, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing for us to look at. We don't have to do a drastic overhaul of everything. Just let's make sure we're keeping the city looking like we want it to look for our children and grandchildren when, you know, when we don't really care anymore. You know what I mean? When we're really, really old, we just like whatever. But
and I will say, I don't know if any of you've been to Helen, Georgia.
Yes,
That is definitely Bavarian.
Mhm.
Even the Wendy's there,
Yep.
they have strict guidelines. Everything
Absolutely.
has to pretty much look the same.
And it looks great. Makes you say wow, doesn't it? When you
Well,
go in,
when you
know?
pull up, yeah, you realize you
Yeah.
feel like you're in a different country.
Right.
But then it's sitting in the middle of a field all by itself too, and we are kind of a continuation on into, you know, into town. But
Mhm.
it'd be
Go
curious
ahead,
to-
Commissioner Russell.
It'd be curious to know if they started from ground zero like that, or if they changed midstream and how long it took the buildings to get that way. I'm not
Mhm.
sure how we would find that out, but you know, if we change the process and say everything's going to be Florida style, or Florida Mediterranean, or Florida Spanish, is it going to be 40 years before we see the change?
Right.
You know, I mean, that's another issue we need to consider.
I would like to commend Commissioner Aldridge for, you know, starting the conversation again. I know Mr. Janke and I've had many discussions since I've been mayor about my feelings and his feelings and others about how we wanted to preserve the historical part of Lynn Haven and to make sure that this part of our city would always be recognizable. But what Commissioner Aldridge, you know, is proposing, the sad part about it is I wish that your proposal had been here 15 or 20 years ago, before this corridor became what it is now. And I think a lot of it is just the types of signage that was allowed, the types of buildings that were allowed. You know, we made so many concessions. When I say we, I mean the city of Lynn Haven. I wasn't here. I've been mayor for just a little over 4 years. But, you know, it's difficult to come in after something's already been done and try to change it. But at the same point, I'm an eternal optimist, and I think that even if you can't ever achieve what you have in your mind, which I think I really know what you have in mind because I have that same sort of vision. I think that we can at least really put some consideration into looking at what we have and what we can do to make it better if possible, or to make it more open to trying to achieve some sort of conformity at the same time without taking away the liberty of our business owners and giving them, you know, the opportunity to build and have what they want. So just having this discussion, and of course I don't think anything could be decided in one meeting, but I think opening the discussion, continuing the discussion, and maybe I know Ben did some things right after the storm, calling in the business owners, and we had some discussions with them on how we could help them to achieve their goals. And maybe that would be a place to start. And a lot of that would be meeting with corporate, of course, with some of these chain stores. But just meeting with business owners and letting them look at some of these designs and talking about, is there a way that maybe we could look at, maybe not a particular architectural design for the entire corridor, but maybe a look of what we don't want to have more of. For example, and not to throw stones at anyone, but there's one small area right on 77 at the intersection of Mowat School Road that is still owned by the county. And so without any input by Lynn Haven, suddenly we got another large billboard right in the middle of Lynn Haven on this county piece of property. So maybe we could, avoid things like that happening, and signage might be a real good place to start and look at and see what we could do to tweak what we have on that. So with all that said, I just wanted to commend you. I think it's a good conversation to have, and I think there are possibilities for change and possibilities for improvement. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that. That I agree 110% with you. I don't necessarily think that we can change the whole world, but I agree that if we are a continuously growing area, and I think we know from statistics and projections from the census that we're going to continue to grow over the next 25, 30 years. There's going to be a lot of people coming in, and so I agree 110%. I wish we would have been able to do this 25 years ago or 15 years ago, but I think before the real kickoff to growth occurs, which I think will be after we definitely clean up after this storm, we want to have some teeth, as we used the term earlier, to get what we're looking for as we grow. So thank you, Mayor.
Mayor,
Yes.
and we want to keep in mind before we put up street lights what kind of theme we want.
Well put.
Yep.
Very good.
Others?
Well, yes, Mayor. We have the guidelines already, but they're only going to be reviewed in the CRA. Is that correct?
The CRA are reviewed by Ben, and if they're developing on the 390 in the corridor overlay, they're reviewed also.
Okay. And the overlay encompasses all of 77 to Baldwin
17th Street,
South.
yes, and then 389 was added about 2 years ago, 18 months, 2 years ago. That was added also. However, the requirements in the corridor overlay are different from the CRA.
Right.
There's more detail in the CRA, which is why I was wondering if you might want to look at that and see if you would like to apply the same CRA ones to all the commercial corridors.
That's something we need to look at, as well as signage, as well as landscaping. You could really change the look of a road by the landscaping.
We have a landscaping requirement. We have landscaping requirements in the code currently. They're a bit hard in the old historic plat area. So in the CRA area, you're not going to see the landscaping in the same way as you are with the new developments, because that's already there, and it's new development really that the ULDC applies to more than anything. So there could be more landscaping requirements put in, but then those lots, those parcels in the CRA area tend to be quite small, and they have stormwater issues, and they don't have the landscaping. But we have an entire landscaping section in our Unified Land Development Code, and where a property is redeveloped,
Right.
or where it's a new property, they have to have landscape buffers and vehicle use area buffers. Now, I will say that that is something that developers tend to laugh at and push back against. They're always wanting a temporary CO before the landscaping has been finished. They'll say they're going to do something when they submit the landscape plan. When I go out to have a look at that before they get their certificate of occupancy, 9 times out of 10 they haven't done it according exactly to how they say they're going to do it. So things like that. There are certain things that developers kind of balk at.
So this is in the overlay too, that we get the.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, you can make it more stringent, but we have, depending on the width of the buffer, they have to have certain types of, depending upon whether it's on a collector road, an arterial, or what's next to it, regarding land use. And they have to have a certain number of canopy trees, understory trees and shrubs for every linear foot, or every 100 linear feet. They have to have a certain number. I'll be happy to show you that if you want to come in to the office sometime.
I'd like to, yep.
Yeah.
Because it's something that we really, if we wanted to change the look, especially as we develop 77 South toward Baldwin, that we really need to hold the people's hand to the fire on as far as how it looks. I think it's a good thing that we take a look at this, and we probably need to look at expanding that ordinance, to the overlay, with signage, landscaping, and and the guidelines that we have.
Sure, go ahead.
Mayor, I was just wondering if you would like for me to pull the sections of the code that deal with signage and also that deal with the landscape buffer requirements, and maybe get them to the city manager so that she can get a copy to you all so you can take a look at them.
Is that the pleasure of the commission? Want to look at some of that? I think that's probably a really good
Yeah.
idea.
Okay.
And as you were talking about the landscaping, it just, I was just thinking, with the revival of Sheffield Park after the hurricane with those big palm trees, even if we found a particular tree, which that's a particularly resilient tree through the storms, if we started at Porter Park and went all the way to our Baldwin corridor, and that would be extremely expensive. It would be something we could ask businesses to do as they build, but just having that unification of that same tree all the way through like that would give you a start of a look. Or a particular kind of wildflower, a particular color that would go all the way through on the median. Just those kinds of things can make a huge, huge difference.
To coordinate it.
Yes.
That's a really good idea.
How much more would it put on you if you had to design review everything in the corridor? Well, you do already, right?
It wouldn't be that. I mean, there are certain things that I have to look at anyway. We have a technical review committee. So Public Works, Bobby Baker looks at what he looks at. Utilities look at what they, it wouldn't take much at all. So long as I've got the guidelines and the rules there, then I can just review it against those rules. It's where there's gray areas that it's difficult. Where there's a definite, this or that, it wouldn't take long. It's easy.
And I agree with what the mayor and Commissioner Perno said with the signage and stuff. It's the details that pull it all together. At the end of the day, the small details, those little things that are easy to overlook, but once you have it all together, it paints a really good picture of what we're looking for. So I agree that the small things we want to pay attention to, not just big.
Mr. Jenke had asked to speak again. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. I would really suggest to look at the big picture first. Think about for a moment how this corridor should look like in 10, 15, maybe 20 years from today. And then really work your way back. Once you know exactly what you're aiming for, it's going to be a lot easier for Amanda to make recommendations how to change the land development code. So, and it's not just only architectural. So step number one would be, let's describe the big picture. In a perfect world, how should the corridor look like? And question number two, how fast should it be implemented? If we want to implement it really fast, it's going to get really expensive for the property owner. If we do it incrementally, whenever there's a new development, whenever there's a renovation, it will be probably less expensive because it just takes some more time. Talking about the design, architectural design of the building is just one component of the overall appearance of that corridor. So there are many other components that should be factored into this overall approach. What about above ground utilities? Let me take a step back and describe 3 examples. An example of no architectural design guidelines is probably 15th Street and Jinx Avenue, that corridor. They're just building whatever they think is the right thing for their business. The other extreme is maybe Rosemary Beach. You have a lot of restrictions, and they tell you exactly how to build your building, where to position your entrance. Somewhere in the middle is maybe Back Beach Road and Backridge Road, that intersection. That corridor actually has some design guidelines. It has underground utilities. There, it has some landscaping requirements. It has some signage requirements for the businesses. You may notice that the signs in that area are lower than the standard business sign. So there are these components, besides the architecture, of landscaping, business signage, how to position your parking. Should you allow the business to have all of the parking in front of the business and have that entrance somewhere in the back? Or maybe put 50% of the parking on the backside of the building so that you can bring the store a little bit closer to the road. You're kind of creating a public space that way. Right. Pedestrian access is another question. So those are just some ideas. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there other comments from the commission?
Yes, I'll just say that I love your idea of the colored flowers in the median, or palm trees, or something that shows continuity all the way down. And the thing is, that could be done and draw their attention away from the nasty buildings that are still up. You know, and
That's
still
true,
give you some
Commissioner Tender.
a
It
definite
is.
look of change.
Yes.
You know, right off the bat.
Coming. It's
I
coming.
know it's somewhat slightly controversial, but the mayor and I attended the TPO meeting last week, and the city manager of Panama City presented a look of a small block. Basically, he was appealing to us to change the DTO plan, the plan of the DOT actually to, but that being said, that type of look would be really a knockout thing for our area as well. So there's a lot that we can look at, and this is very stimulating, maybe to set the course for just what Ben said, some more bullet points to go to a further workshop to set up some hard, fast rules for the overlay, as well as the corridor that's already in place. So
Thank you. So as we get closer to the end of the workshop, we have about 12 minutes left. What is the pleasure of the commission as to continuing this conversation, and when would you like to do it again?
Sometime next year.
Yes, I concur with that, Commissioner Tender. I'd like to keep the ball rolling. I mean, I'd like to see us put together a workshop maybe for the second meeting
In January?
in January.
So
Yes,
what
ma'am.
about the second meeting in January? Is there any objection to that? So we could ask city manager to maybe put that on the agenda, that we would have a workshop an hour before the meeting at that second meeting in January. And since we do have a few moments left, is there anything else from the commission first on this subject? Is there anyone from the public? We have about 10 minutes left. If any of you have some thoughts about what we've just been discussing as far as trying to bring some continuity and some design guidelines for the future for this area as we're rebuilding. Anybody have some comments you'd like to bring forward? Sure, come on up.
You can blame Ben for that. She's the one who my name is Patrick Jones. I'm in the commercial real estate business. I work with developers and corporate users that you would like to populate your street front. I also used to be on the Main Streets Board, as well as the chair of the Port St. Joe Redevelopment Authority for a number of years as well. So I've gone through and live a lot of what y'all are going through right now. And I think what you're doing from a total perspective is absolutely the right thing to do. There are just a couple things that we went through that I would suggest to keep in mind while you're going through it. One, about creating the upgrading to the remodeling, triggering on remodels or changes of ownership. I would suggest against that, because what that does is it creates a disincentive for someone to approach to trigger that threshold. You know, if it happens in a storm event, a fire event, some sort of casualty, understand completely. New construction, understand completely. But what it will end up doing is hurting property values and disincentivizing transactions in new development. So that's just something, you know, spoonful of sugar will help a lot more in that regard. One of the things that we did to great effect was we really invested a lot of money, a percentage of our budgets in terms of the CRA, into the facade grant programs. We try to be very robust in the amount of dollars that we could participate with an owner to say, hey, your look is old, it's dated, it's not attractive, it hurts surrounding property values. We will pitch in 50%. Or if it's on a major corridor and you're talking about paint colors, even as much as 75% or higher. Something to really try and increase the pace. And that's something, we talk about going 20 years out in front. It may take 40 years. If you want to speed that up, try and look at incentive programs to hasten that process. If you help them and you convince them, hey, if you'll invest in your property, we'll participate in that investment with you, you'll find, or at least we found, a far greater response on Reed Avenue and on our streetscape on Highway 98 when we took that approach. It was a great response. In terms of the landscaping and some of the things you're talking about, I would also suggest that you means test this a little bit. So, what is that percentage increase in the cost of construction going to do? Compare it to what it is now. At least understand that. Historically, impact fees in the city of Lynn Haven have created somewhat of a bad taste and a disincentive to locate businesses here because of those costs. Understand when you add in those landscaping features, when you add in these finishes, what that's going to do. So you realize that you're raising that hurdle to develop in this area. And when it comes to that, a big part of what I always tell property owners is know thyself, know your demographics, know the ones that those data inputs that are going to go into the corporate user software modeling to decide, do we want to locate here? And if you raise that cost threshold higher because of your development restrictions, that's going to create a disincentive and it will slow the transformation of the town. So just, again, it's worth the effort to take that extra step and understand that at the end of the day, unlike a Rosemary where you can literally bring it up from the ground new, you have a lot of established. You may want to also think about, are we looking for a specific theme, or are we looking for a collection of things with a primary objective of quality? And that's where another incentive programs can come in to assist in that effort. If you say you can do it on your own this way, or we can participate in this with you by directing some of our CRA funds or whatever funds may be associated for aesthetic improvement along the overlay to doing it our way. Your net expense will be lower if you do it our way than if you do it your own way. So just a couple of things.
Thank you. We appreciate that input. Very valuable input. Thank you. Yes, go ahead.
Do you have a ballpark number that y'all threw out when you were reporting how much y'all were paying yearly on that incentive program?
I'm trying to remember the structures. I know for facade grants, it was 50% up to, I think, $10,000. For the properties that had view to the primary thoroughfare of 98, for paint, just to have a fresh coat of paint, we would pay 90%. For signage, we would pay up to the first $1,000 of the signage improvement. And those would be very, very effective. Now, I don't, there were a lot of other aspects to it, but those are the 3 points that I remember.
I got one more question.
Sure, go ahead.
Were y'all proactive? Did you go out looking for the properties and talking to them, or did you wait for them to come to you?
That's the advantage of being a small town. Sooner or later, you're going to see them in church. You're going to see them this. But at the end of the day, if you have a robust incentive program, people will find you. When you're dealing with smaller towns, small ownerships, small business operators, they're going to see a pot of money. They're going to see an opportunity to invest in what is an important asset for their livelihoods, and they're going to find you. From a corporate perspective, they will be pretty flexible. They got their points that they got to hit, but ultimately they'll conform to what you have as long as it doesn't create an overall disincentive to development.
Thank you so much. Any other comments before we end the workshop from the commission? Any from the public? Yes, Ms. Richard.
So as we've set the date of the next workshop, shall I just get those sections of the code and give them to the city manager to get to you before the next workshop then?
I think that would be advisable, and then we can go from there.
And would you all like a copy of the ordinance? You had those the design guidebook from Orange County. Would you like a copy of their ordinance?
Be great. Thank you so much. Anything else? So at this time, we have approximately 9 minutes before the regularly scheduled commission meeting begins, and so I will bring this workshop to a close. It is adjourned. I think it was very productive, and once again, thank you, Commissioner Aldridge, for bringing the